Today is Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. My name is Carol Weinshell. I'm the Vice President of Program and Membership of Congregation Rodeph Sholom in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I always tell you who I am so that we have a recording with the information for the archives. We've done a lot of programs. We've been to a lot of places. We've traveled the world. Some of you have been participants. Some of you have been the audience. Today is going to be a little different, which you don't know. And we decided last night, Cantor Hirsch and I, this is going to be a two-part program. Today is the first, and I will tell you when the second is when today is over. Cantor Hirsch is going to take us to Tunisia. She's going to talk about Tunisia during the Holocaust. She's going to talk about her family. She's going to talk about a whole host of things. So as usual in our coffee and conversations, even though this is not morning, it's afternoon, we'll learn, we'll laugh, we'll cry, we'll ask questions, and we'll come away that much better for having sat in on tea and conversation. I hope you all brought your snacks. I can't provide for you through the computer. You're on your own, but you may hold me to it when we're in person. So with that said, Cantor Hirsch, take it away. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Carol, for the introduction. As Carol said, my subject is the Jews of Tunis during the Holocaust. And I believe that I need to see a thumbs up if you're seeing my screen. Yes, good. I worked on this project a little bit over a year ago and completed it quite recently. I'll take you through why I chose to study Tunisia and specifically Tunisia during the Holocaust, a little bit about the geography and the Jewish community, some family memories will be interspersed throughout my presentation. I will then talk about Vichy France and Nazi Germany, go into some Holocaust type information, the final solution, and if we don't, this section may be expanded more in the next presentation, in the following presentation. There's a whole section called Sfaradim in the Shoah, and I don't think that I will get to it, as well as some memories of my actual trip to Tunisia that I will definitely not get into today. And so we start now with the reason for me for choosing this subject for master project. For me, research on the Jews of Tunisia is a path of self-discovery. This project helped me connect with my Tunisian heritage. I grew up in an Ashkenazi home, in an Ashkenazi community. And so I was curious about my identity as both Ashkenaz and Sepharad and find out more about the Sephardi part of my ancestry. So it is my heritage, it's my identity, and of course a high level of curiosity that led me to research the Jews of Tunis in the city of Tunis during the Holocaust, which is the city where my mother grew up. This is the carte d'identité of my mother in her late teen years. Her last name was Geta, first name Hélène, French name. Masouda, she was named Masouda after the deceased mother of her father. Although in my family, in my Tunisian family, we often name after a living grandparents, but in this case, the grandmother died, and the first girl that was born was named after Masouda. She's Tunisian nationality, born on October 19, 1929, which means that she's 93 years old. And at the time, she lived in Tunis in 19 Rue Sidi Baem. You can see the French influence in everything, including the 50 francs that it cost to put a stamp on this carte d'identité. And so begin our trip. But actually, I'm bringing you right into present day. My mother is no longer called Hélène. She's called Leah, her Hebrew name. She married my father, Yekutiel Katz, so her last name now is Katz. And she's here with Jonah Hirsch. That's my grandson. I took the picture a year ago. We were in Israel last year, and with the grandson. And so you can see my mom today. She has 18 grandchildren and over 20 great-grandchildren. We grew up observant. And one of my brothers actually is responsible for 9 out of the 18 grandchildren that she has, because he remained observant and has a large family. My mother is a Holocaust survivor, and she receives reparations from Germany. So that's where the story begins, and also that's where it ends. How does a Jew from Tunisia receive reparation from Germany? Victor Young Perez was born in Tunisia, in Tunis, Tunisia, the same city as my mother, 15 years earlier. Was born in 1911, and you can see right away when somebody dies in 1945, you have a pretty good idea what happened. He was called the Boxer of Auschwitz. He was a French citizen. He immigrated from Tunis to France, and as a French man, became a champion in boxing in 1931 at age 20. He was very thin and very small man, and a great fighter. He was deported to Auschwitz by French collaborators who gave his name to the Nazis, and he was deported along with 1,000 French Jews to Auschwitz. While in the camp, he was fighting regularly 140 boxing matches in total to amuse the SS guards. He went on the death march in January 1945, and unfortunately he was shot by a guard. So that's Victor Young Perez. And a movie was made in 2013 about his experience in Auschwitz. Actually, he was a celebrity in Paris, so the movie described at great length his lovers and his good life in Paris. And it says surviving Auschwitz, but we know that he went on the death march after Auschwitz, after a year and a half, and in Auschwitz, and he died by being shot by a guard. This is one of the most famous pictures of the Jews of Tunis when they were taken to a forced labor camp. This picture was probably done in December, early or mid-December. December 9 was the day that the decision was made by the Germans to take Jews to work at labor camps. They worked in fortification of the camps. The camps were run by the Wehrmacht, the Russian army, but also some camps were run by the Italians. As you may know, the Italians collaborated with the Germans, and they had a presence in North Africa. A book by, I put here a cover of a book by Omar Boom and Sarah Breva Stein. And look at the title, The Holocaust and North Africa, not the Holocaust in North Africa. There is a lot of politics associated with the Holocaust, as we will be discussing a little bit later, especially when we get to the Sfaradim in the Shoah. So the authors would not dare saying that the Shoah, the Holocaust, occurred in North Africa, but certainly there was an involvement, a serious involvement on many levels of the Jews of North Africa in the Shoah. 50, there were 30 camps, and 5,000 men were working in those 30 camps. They went to work. You can see the tools, but you can also see the bread that one of them is holding, clothing. They're wearing winter clothes. It's December, and they're marching to work. This is a picture that I took less than a year ago at the Bourgel Cemetery in Paris. I'm standing next to a memorial. At the time when I took the picture, I did not realize that Uncle Meir was one of the names on this, but I sent this picture to my cousin in Israel, and he identified Uncle Meir in this picture. Let me zoom in a little. So Emile is Meir and Jouy. Emile Jouy was the husband of my grand-aunt Marcel. And he was among the Jews who died sous l'occupation Nazi, under the occupation of the Nazis. And his memorial is here in the Bourgel Cemetery. So I gave you some background of why I chose this as a topic, and got you a little bit closer to the Jews of Tunisia during the Holocaust. But really, I want to give a little more background on the Jewish community, and that brings us into some geography and so forth. Now, I did some of this geography on Hanukkah, and some of you may have studied history and studied geography, may be familiar. So I'll go rather quickly over this slide. This is the Mediterranean Sea. Here is Israel, over in the east. Israel is over here. Cyprus, the boot of Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, and now let's look at North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. As you can see, this is the boot of Italy and Sicily, and the city of Tunis is over here, very close to the boot. However, the Italians conquered Libya, and Libya became an Italian protectorate, a colony. But the French took over the Maghreb, the Ma'arav, the western North Africa, and Tunisia became part of the French colonial environment. We'll move a little closer. Actually, you can see it looks a little bit like a pregnant lady. This is the border here, and a very long seafront. A lot of beautiful beaches in Tunisia. A few cities that I will want to talk about today. The city of Tunis, the capital of Tunisia, pretty close to the shore, but not the northernmost city. The northernmost is Bizerte. This is where my uncle Eli worked in a German camp, a very large German camp that was bombarded regularly. I'll talk about his survival and his escape. Sidi Bou Said, a beautiful place to visit near Tunis. Nebel, that's where my grandparents are from. Their names is Shalom and Simcha Zaytun. They were from Nebel, but my grandmother went and lived in Tunis, and that's where she married my grandfather Nissim. Nissim actually grew up in Tripoli. There were pogroms in Tripoli, and his father was killed. His mother took him and his younger brother on a march with other refugees toward Tunisia. His mother and the young brother died. Nisi, my grandfather, continued walking. I presume he walked all the way, arrived at Tunis, and that's where he met my grandma. He was an orphan, and he married her. He married well. Geography and population of Tunis, the capital. You may have heard of Carthage or Carthago, that was established by the Phoenicians in the 9th century. Jerba Island, which again I talked about during our Hanukkah event, they said the Jews arrived in that island after the destruction of the first temple in the 6th century, which is a pretty, makes it the most ancient, one of the most ancient Jewish communities. And there are still Jews living there to this day. There are 1,000 Jews in Jerba. According to Josephus Flavius, Titus exiled 30,000 Jews to Carthage in the 1st century. So that's after the destruction of the Second Temple. The city of Tarshish, which is mentioned in the book of Yonah, the book that we read on Yom Kippur afternoon, according to Rashi, the city of Tarshish is actually Tunis. The Arab and Islamic conquest of North Africa occurred in the 7th century, and of course to this day they are an Islamic country and they speak Arabic. Spanish and Portuguese Jews were expelled, as we know, from Iberian Peninsula, from Spain, and many of them made their way to North Africa. A large majority went to Morocco, but as you know, the Rambam, for example, went all the way to, well, earlier, before the expulsion, but all the way to Egypt as well. But no, he was in the 12th century. European migrations occurred later on, mostly from France and Italy. Once they became protectorate, many French and Italian Jews migrated to North Africa, including Tunis. The Jewish community of Tunis in the late 19th century and early 20th century was, of course, not united. There was the Toansa, descendants of native-born Tunisian Jews, which means that they went all the way to the 1st century or even earlier, and the Jews who were expelled from Spain and so forth. They were the majority of Jewish population, and there in the city of Tunis there were 45,000 Jews in 1940s. In the whole country there are about 90,000. The Gerana are from Spanish Italian origin, but really they came from Italy, from the Livorno, and over time all the Jews that came from Christian countries were called Gerana. The language they spoke was Italian, in addition to some Arab, obviously. The Toansa spoke French, the Gerana spoke Italian, they had separate rabbis and so forth. Now, the picture I have here is actually of the Toansa and Gerana rabbis standing side by side, but this picture was taken after the Germans left and peace was made within the Jewish community. I also have a picture here of the Grand Synagogue of Tunis. I couldn't take a picture in the front because it was blocked, so I took a picture from the side, and this particular one I had to download from the internet. I do have a side view, but this is much more impressive look at the synagogue that has the 10 commandments decorated on top. At the cemetery of Borgel, we went to the most important tomb in the country, which is Rabbi Chaim Tayeb Lomet. Rabbi Chai, last name Tayeb, Lomet, he did not die. He was a Mekubal Gadol, Kabbalah Ma'asit, which means he did a lot of miracles. And one of the traditions in Tunisia is that when you go to somebody's tomb to the cemetery, you eat fruit and cookies because you say Baruch Ata she'akol niya bidvaro, or you say Borei Pri Ha'etz, so you say a bracha on the food and the drink that you have, and your blessing goes up to heaven because you are blessing God in this holy place near the tomb of Rabbi Chaim Lomet. Moving on to some timeline. This is timeline really for the country of Tunisia. In 1881, the country of Tunisia, which was not really a country, it became a French protectorate. In the 1880s, what we call a country today, what they call country then, was slightly different definitions, but I'm not going to go into that. And it remained a protectorate and a colony all the way to 1954. Just so you remember, Israel became independent of the British Mandate in 1948. So this is quite a few years after Israel had independence, and it's really a full 9 years after the end of World War II. Tunisia was under Vichy France during the war. Vichy France from July 1940 to August 44. Within that time period, there was a German occupation from November 42 to May 1943. The point of liberation, May 7, 1943, liberation from Germany, and then liberation from Vichy occurred a few months later. Not really, a few years later, a year later. As you remember, we'll get into the war a little later, but by 1944, Charles de Gaulle already was in the scene, and Vichy government fell, and beginning of the end of the war, and we were liberated from that. Tunisia had a path to independence that took her all the way from the end of the Vichy period all the way to 1956. They had to negotiate for peace. And what we see here at the bottom right is the flag of Tunisia, which is reminiscent of the flag of Turkey. It has a moon and a star. So I'm not going to go much further into that. And during the French protectorate, the situation of the Jews improved very much. There was obviously social and economic progress that came with the French. The French built banks and roads, bridges, ports, stores, cafe, of course. Jews became active participants in the economy. They were small merchants before, but now they became part of the professions. Doctors, lawyers, architects, merchants, and so forth involved in teaching, and clerks. The education and the culture was very much influenced by France. AIU, or Kol Israel Chaverim, is the name of the school that came to Tunis. AIU, the first school was established in Paris in the 1860 to promote Jewish self-defense and self-sufficiency through education and professional development. The AIU schools were established throughout the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire, and Iran. And all Jews are responsible for one another. Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Bazeh. They have their emblem, and they have here the handshaking and the Luchot HaBrit, the Ten Commandments, part of the symbols of the school. And my mother went to that school, and of course with that school came French culture and French language and French food. Some of the family recollections, the language spoken at home and in the street was Tunisian Judeo-Arabic dialect. There was some Italian at the home. Nisi, my grandfather, came from Libya, and I understand that when my Uncle Eli was born, when he was young, they actually still spoke a little bit of Italian. And so my mother, oldest brother, actually knew Italian, but she didn't. She learned French in the France and the Alliance Israelite Universelle. And this is a picture of the school during the years that she was there. I found this on the web, in Wikipedia. I don't see her in this picture, but I know that she was 6 years old when the picture was taken. So you see the girls, probably taken in the winter. They look a little cold. They were taken out for the picture. They're very lovely girls. Okay, the girls in Tunis. Another picture I have here is an old map of Tunis. Now, my mother's street is no longer there. My uncle already was there in 1990, and he said the street disappeared. They redid a lot of the streets here, but I found it in a very old map. It took me a day to look through old maps and to painfully read every street until I found this one. Rue Sidi Baem, I found the street. This is the Cemetery Israelite. This is what became later on Borgel, but actually this is not where the cemetery is today. The cemetery moved north from here in the city of Paris, in the city of Tunis, but farther north. And the synagogue must have been, the synagogue is still there, but I don't see it on this map. So I think it was a little bit lower over here because I looked at the map and I estimate it's here. By the way, this looked like a Christian cemetery, and here we have some kind of a Muslim. So we have, but look how large the large Jewish community. And so they had, large cemetery. This is also another Muslim cemetery. Jews were quite prominent, 45,000 citizens in the city of 200,000 or 300,000, so a pretty substantial minority. And we'll move on to Jews and Arabs. On Shabbat afternoon, this is the story from my family, Arab neighbors would come visit and usually bring fruit. The family was kosher. They knew not to bring anything except fruits or vegetables, so they brought fruit. And they drink arak or buka with the Jewish men. I assume that the reason they drank with us is because they were probably not allowed to drink at home. Now, generally today, Arabs in Tunisia, they drink alcohol. It's not a very strict country, but I think in those days, if Arab wanted to drink, they would go to their Jewish neighbors to drink arak. After Pesach, this is a story that my mother always told us, that after Pesach, the Arab brought fresh bread to my grandparents' house. And I always thought it was such a lovely neighborly thing to do. During Yom Kippur, she said, the Arabs covered the baked goods in the bake shop, in the patisserie, boulangerie. Everything was covered on Yom Kippur so that when the Jews went to the synagogue, they wouldn't see the bread. So they covered it and they sold it, and they covered it again when the Jews returned from synagogue. I don't want to go too much into comparing it to my experience with Arabs in Israel, but I can say that my experience with Arabs is enemies, terrorist, violent, war. I don't have any positive experience with Arabs, but many Jews who came from North Africa, the older ones, remember very, very positive the relationship with their Arabs. I'm going to go into this alcohol story a little bit because my grandfather worked in this factory. It's called the Bokovza. The name of the factory is Bokovza. It's a family name. Bokovza is a family name, famous name. And the drink that they make is called buka. And the buka is a brandy made from figs. I have here a picture of figs. And the Bokovza family, this has been distilling it since the 1880s. My grandfather's job was to taste the liquor. That was his job, a liquor tester. So I thought in his memory to kind of give you a little bit of taste of our life in Tunisia. Now we're ending the happier or the more positive side of my story, and we're getting into Vichy France and Nazi Germany and the course of the war. And Vichy France took over Tunisia on July 10, 1940, and then German occupation began November 9, 1942, and I'll go through all the different stages of the war. The French signed an armistice agreement with Germany in June 1940. So they didn't surrender, but okay, for all practical purposes, French became occupied by Germany and was no longer part of the Allies with England and the rest of Europe. The occupied zone was the north of France, including Paris. Paris was occupied. The Germans annexed some parts by Strasbourg and in the north of France. This is Belgium. This whole seaboard, the whole coast was called the Atlantic Wall. As you know, you probably know, the Germans were going to go into England after this. I mean, they were bombing England from here. And after they conquered France, they were going to go into England. It didn't work out. The British Navy was very strong. The British were able to absorb a lot of the bombing, and so the guns were turned toward the USSR. And I know this is not about World War II, but you're familiar with the war, so I'll just remind you of a few other things. Okay. The southern part was called Free Zone, and the government was in the city of Vichy. The governor name, let me go back to the slide. The governor was actually a war hero of World War II called Marshal Philippe Pétain, and he was the head of the city of Vichy. Much to his shame, here he's shaking hands with Hitler, Ymar Shemo. And Vichy proceeded to write Statut de Juif. Juif is Jew. Status is laws of the Jews. Numérique clausée, particular laws that limit Jewish professions. Doctors and lawyers were not allowed to practice their profession and limit access to schools and universities. Jewish properties was organized by the Vichy decree. I can go into a lot of other things. I just want to mention that there was a typhoid epidemic. So, you know, there's a lot of nuance, and I never knew how much to get into it. But there was a typhoid epidemic, and Arab doctors were begging the Vichy government to allow Jewish doctors to come in and do the work and help relieve the epidemic. This was in Tunisia, but also in Morocco. And possibly Algeria as well. And so the point I'm trying to say is that there were a lot of other forces. So even though there were Vichy laws, they were not always enforced. And for example, the laws against the doctors had to be relaxed because of a typhoid epidemic. We have a lot to cover, so once in a while I'll throw some anecdotes. I just want to tell you that there's a lot here already. America entered the war as a result of Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was a day remembered in infamy. Let's see if I remember. December 7, 1941. So almost a year later, 11 months later, the American army is ready to enter the war in Europe. They were already fighting against Japan in the Pacific, and now General Eisenhower is commanding task forces and going into North Africa. One task force went to Morocco. If you saw the movie Patton, this is where Patton began the war here. Of course, later on, we know that Patton went to Sicily, Italy, and up into Europe, okay? So that one force is here, another force in Oran, in Algeria, and then in Algiers. The question is, why didn't Eisenhower go all the way to Tunisia? Why did he leave it exposed to the Germans? Well, two things. Number one, supply line. They had to supply through the Pacific Ocean. This is the Pacific Ocean. No, Atlantic Ocean. They had to create a supply line, and they didn't have enough material and personnel to go all the way to Tunisia. The other reason is that Tunisia is very close to Italy, and in fact, the Italian and the Germans were able to go through Italy and conquer Tunis a day after Eisenhower began Operation Torch. While this is happening here in the western North Africa, in the east, Rommel, the Desert Fox, is fighting Monty, and at this point, November 1942, Montgomery already won major war in Al Alamein in Egypt, and Rommel is retreating from Egypt to Libya, and eventually Rommel gets to Tunisia, and from here he gets shipped up to Germany, and later on he fights in Normandy, I believe. Rommel was still, he was fighting again in Europe. So there are forces, British forces, with Montgomery pushing from the east and Eisenhower pushing from the west. There's a sandwich here, and in the middle of the sandwich is Tunisia. So as I said, Germany invaded Tunis on November 9. General Walter Nering was the Wehrmacht commander of the Africa Corps. Rauf was the SS commander. He was sent to Tunis. Now, Rauf has a history in Europe in the SS. He was responsible for the mobile gas trucks. There's a picture of Simon Wiesenthal holding picture of Walter Rauf in one hand, and on the other hand, he's showing the death trucks that Rauf was responsible for. So this Simon Wiesenthal. Anyway, going back to 1942, Rauf arrested the heads of the Jewish community, Paul Gez, Louis Bourgel, Rav Chaim Blais, and others. He demanded to organize a Jewish committee similar to the Judenreich. And a year after the invasion, a month after the invasion, on December 9, he demanded 2,000 workers within one day. It took a little more than a day, but eventually up to 5,000 Jews were busy working in fortification. This is the picture that I showed you earlier of Jews walking toward their labor camp. And this is a picture of Paul Gez, who became really a hero of the Jewish community. He was the head of the community, and he dealt well with the Germans. He wrote his memoir, which came out within a year after the war. Tunisia under the Jews of Tunisia under Nazi occupation. They worked in 30 army labor camps. My history professor who advised me on this told me that the Jews were very lucky that there was no SS in the camps. This was regular German army, and there were also some Italian camps where the Italian army was in charge, and I understood from my reading that the Italians were a lot more sympathetic and easier on the Jews than the Germans. The Jews had to wear a yellow star to identify them as workers. They suffered from malnutrition and poor hygiene, very long work hours, and the worst part is that they were located where the Allied were bombing. The British and the Americans were bombing them constantly. They were bombing the German camp, but the workers in the camps were exposed to those bombs, and 100 men died, mostly from the Allied bombs, and I think a small percentage died from illness, and a few people were shot, but really there was no mass killing. In the city of Tunis, the Germans confiscated Jewish homes and belongings. There was again hunger, fear, intimidation in the city, and fines and taxes by the millions, 63 million francs total. The Jewish community had to take bank loans. The rich Jews had to make Jewish property as collateral so that they can collect all this money as taxes and fines to the Germans. If you ever wonder how the Germans made it to South America and lived rather well in Uruguay, Paraguay, Argentina, etc., Chile, and so forth, it's because they stole all this money from Europe and also here from North Africa. Some of it was gold, some of it was in hard currency, and they put it in the banks. And then later on, when they escaped to South America, they had plenty of money. So some family recollection. The school that my mother went to, Allianz, became a yard to detain laborers. My grandfather Nissim was captured by the Germans. They were running around the city looking for Jews. And he escaped a couple of times, but one day, as he went home for lunch, they captured him and they sent him to work in a cement and phosphate plant in a mountain hill called Jebel Jelud. Uncle Eli was also captured, and he was taken to Bizerte, an army camp, a very large army camp. Grandmother, her name is Ninette. By the way, that's a picture of Nissim and Ninette on their wedding day. She was very beautiful. She was a very tall and very beautiful woman. She worked and took care of 3 children. My mother, Uncle Eli was sent to the camp, so my mother was 13 and she was the oldest child, and there were 2 other little children in the house, as well as the handicapped sister, who couldn't really help much. And in fact, to some extent, many Jews escaped to the countryside, but because the handicapped aunt, my mother said they couldn't leave, and whenever the city was bombed, they would jump into bed with the aunt and said Shema Israel. And that's how they survived 6 months of bombing. There was lack of food. The Germans took a lot of the food and stored it, of course, for themselves. The German soldiers were marching in the street, throwing a lot of fame. There was some rape, but I understood, well, they were saved because the Italian neighbors pushed the Germans out and told them there are no girls here. But generally, the German command didn't want to terrorize the population. And so there was one case of rape, a couple of cases, but mostly they were okay, they behaved well. Now, I have a couple of humorous anecdotes, believe it or not. Yes, you can always find humor or irony. My grandmother hitched a ride with the Germans to deliver food and change of clothes for my grandfather. And my Uncle Eli had a great escape, and I'm going to go over some of that, I think, beginning with Uncle Eli. So as I said, he was in the Bizerte air base and seaport. It was occupied by both German and Italians. The city was bombed relentlessly. The city population escaped, and the city was completely destroyed. In all my reading, Bizerte was the worst army camp. Poor nutrition, no sanitation, illness, constant bombing, but Uncle Eli worked in the kitchen. And when he came back to Tunis after the war, he looked great. How did it happen? Well, he learned to cook because his mom was a great chef, so he learned to cook, and they put him together with another Italian chef in the kitchen. So this is the story of Uncle Eli and his great escape. Well, the Germans said that they will take children only from age 17 and up. Eli was 16 years old, but this is his story. He admired Clark Gable. The movie Gone with the Wind was a big movie at the time. And my uncle, at age 16, grew a beautiful mustache. He wanted to look like Clark Gable. One day, Eli in Tunis went to deliver food to my grandfather Nissim, who was held in the Allianz schoolyard. The Germans saw him, and he said, "I'm 16." He was not afraid to go, because 16-year-old, you should go back home. But they said, no, you're older. You're pretending to be 16. He looked older. He looked handsome and tall, and he had a mustache. So he was sent to the camp. So the mustache got him in trouble. How did he escape? So I said that he was a cook, right? He was cooking with the Italian cook. So one day the Italian cook said, tomorrow they're bringing uniform, Italian military uniform for us. I went on the web and I found Italian uniform from World War II with the soldier doing the artichoke, the artichoke, the way rega, you do it in Israel too, when you want to talk and you want to slow down. Italian military uniform, World War II. So 2 sets of uniform were brought into the kitchen. Eli and the other cook got dressed, jumped into the truck. This is a Fiat truck that was used in World War II. Again, just pictures from the web. And off he went from Bizerte to Nebel. Now, I don't think I can't show you that, but it was a long ride. Anyway, do I have a picture of it? Oh, I think I do have it here. 1 second. So he went really kind of cross country. Hello. I picked it up. This is from Google Map. City of Bizerte over here. City of Nebel over here. This is where my great-grandparents were. So that's his grandparents. Simcha and Shalom Zaytun lived here with the Aunt Jaja. And so he went from this Bizerte to Nebel. This is Tunis. But he was afraid to, I assume that he was afraid to go to Tunis because he was afraid that they'll send him back to camp, or God knows what they're going to do to him. So he escaped to his grandparents and he spent the rest of the war here, doing pretty good. Okay, so that's Uncle Eli and the Great Escape. And now come my grandma. So my grandma is hitching a ride with the Germans, delivering food and supply to my grandfather. It's just, you couldn't make it up. So I took a picture of Google with the Grand Synagogue, because I lived not far from the synagogue. They lived a walking distance from the synagogue, Grand Synagogue of Tunis. And these are, today's roads. Maybe the roads were different at the time, but here's Jebel Jalud, and my grandmother is hitching a ride with the Germans to the camp, bringing food. I think one day I'm going to write a story, and I'm going to totally make it up that they loved her food, and that she brought like a food for the driver and for the other Nazis, and they gave her a ride, and I'm going to make a whole story. I'm going to make a whole story about that. I just find it so fascinating, and my mother tells it with straight face. She doesn't even see the irony of the whole thing. Anyway, I put a picture of Waze over here. Just okay. Anyway. Liberation Day came not soon enough. Liberation on May 7, 1943. This is a picture of Churchill saluting the Allies in the Roman amphitheater at Carthage on one day in June 1943, about a month after the liberation, and as befitting Churchill, lifting his hat on top of a walking stick. Lovely picture. Some family recollection about the Day of Liberation. I see we're going to run out of time, but that's okay. We have another presentation for the end of the month. On Friday, May 7, my mother said no one kept Shabbat. As I told you earlier, Germans took a lot of the food and they stored it. Well, the stores were open, and people were hoarding food and wine and dry goods, celebrating, singing, eating, drinking, and hugging each other. Jews jumped into cars. It was already Shabbat. Jews jumped into cars with the American and British soldiers and took joyrides throughout the city of Tunis. My mother brought an American soldier home to meet the family. This is the first connection between my mother and the Americans. Later on, she will have a son-in-law who is a Jewish American. That's my husband. The Italian neighbors disappeared. You couldn't hear Italian anymore on the street. Remember, the Italians were now the enemies. The Arabs went into hiding and the Jews rejoiced. So some pictures of the British marching into Paris and some of the trucks of the Allies as they enter Tunis. And Zionism was on the rise, along with the rise of Arab nationalism. As I said, Tunisia was still a protectorate, but Arabs started to demand nationhood. The Jews were trying to reconcile the friends that they adored before the war with the friends that collaborated with Germany and betrayed them. The French colonial control was still in place in Tunis for a few more months. But remember, the French motto in the French Revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité. What happened to that? The Jews were very disappointed. There was a lot of assimilation. There was a lot of Francophiles, Jews before. But now they were looking for other solution. There was no identity with the Arabs because the Arabs were becoming nationalist toward their own nationhood, and the Jews didn't always feel part of that. So the Zionist movement was on the rise, Tzeirei Zion, the young Zion. And look at the day they established, July 14. July 14 is the day of the Bastille, right? The Bastille Day in France. So the day that the French Revolution started, July 14, is the day in 1943 that the Jews began to establish a Zionist movement. In addition to that, there were a few other forces that strengthened Zionism. There were soldiers from Israel who served in the British Army. Because of the war in North Africa, the Israeli, well, they were not Israeli, they were Palestinian Israelis, whatever you want to call them. They were Jews who lived in Palestine. And they could not return to Palestine, pre-state Israel at the time, so they remained in Tunis. In fact, they remained throughout North Africa. They were teaching Hebrew. My mother went to the basement of the Grand Synagogue to study Hebrew. Later on, she went with youth to Hachshara in Poujadran, near Toulouse in the southwest France. And then she made Aliyah on a boat Mudeka on March 1949. This is the picture of my mom when she made Aliyah at age 19. Machleket HaKlita, the absorption section of the Israeli government. And with that, we finished barely a half of my presentation. Well, 2/3 actually. We did not go at all into anything to do with the final solution, or Sfaradim in the Shoah, or travel in Tunisia, although we did a little bit of the travel in my other presentation. So I'm going to do, it's now 2:55, I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to talk about Wannsee, which is the final solution for the Jewish question, and all the plans around that, and whether or not Tunisia was part of the final solution. And was Tunisia talking about intention versus function, the meaning of the Holocaust. I get deeper and deeper into Holocaust studies. And then I'm making a case study of the Shoah using Tunisia as a case study. And I go on from there. I think at this point, I will stop the sharing. If I can get back to Zoom. Let's see.
So, Nima,
Yeah.
you are a perfect example of the success of coffee or tea and conversation, because we at Rodeph Sholom are blessed with such a rich history of people. And that's how we've learned so much, is from our own people. We don't have to hire strangers to come in. Your background is incredible. I mean, I've known you for a long time, and I'm sure that I can speak for the people in this audience that they have learned a tremendous amount from you. And I can also say that if this is going to be your presentation, you're going to do very well, and we're going to be cheering from behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Because you really did a great job. I know that, see, they're all clapping because
Thank
you really did. Before I forget, part 2 is January 31st, which is a Tuesday. I'm throwing you now into a tailspin at 10 o'clock in the morning. Again, coffee or tea, it's your preference. And Nima will do part 2. We have just a very few minutes. So if you have questions, she will entertain them, but we won't go past 5 minutes after 3. So if you have a question, unmute yourself and raise your hand, and we'll take it from there. Lana?
Yes, very quick. I thought it was very comprehensive, excellent. Few comments. Fido Perez is very similar to Harry Haft, who was in the movie of The Survivor, that also was in Auschwitz, and was fighting for money. The Nazis used to, the fighters. It's good to see. In terms of the geography, I noted that most of the Jews lived in a non-desert situation. The pharmacists, the doctors, the professional people were safe because the Jews were mostly educated. I mean, not mostly, but a lot of them were educated and they didn't have resources. So that was another thing. I had a question, but I don't know if it's for now or maybe for next time. How did the Spanish War, Civil War had affected, because it was in 1939, because of geography proximity? Another one is I noted that your last name from the genealogy was Gote, which is a Venetian name, which is Italian, but I guess it's very common in France and Tunisia. And also, I know that in Italy, for example, they knew who were the Italian Jews because of the geographical city names of the locations.
Yeah.
So maybe the same thing went there.
Yeah, Geta, 1 second. Geta is my grandfather. His ancestors came from Italy to Tripoli. By the way, Tripoli is 3 city. Tripoli. Poli is city. So Tripoli is made of 3 cities that became one Tripoli. Yes, but his ancestry is Italian.
The other thing that I thought, one more thing about the Holocaust. You noted that the Tunisian Jews were lucky in a way because the labor camps were under Italians, who were more, let's say,
More lenient. More lenient.
Intimidation. I'm sure that Erica can tell you, because we come from the same geographical area. My parents and my husband's parents was Holocaust survivors, and they were in labor camps of the Romanians. There was, because the Nazis came in, they took over and they placed the Romanians as a puppet government. So that was the other reason why some people survived. I know I have a lot of comments, but I don't want to take up all the.
It's
I thought it was
obvious.
excellent, very interesting.
It's obvious you took a lot of notes.
Well,
I can see you're a great student.
Oh, I don't know. There's always something to learn, and this was very, very interesting because it reminisced not only from the books, but it was your personal story and your research, which is makes it very personal and very something to relate to. And
well,
remember,
we're very happy to have you as a Zoom groupie, Lana.
Oh,
Sheila, did you have a question? No? Okay. It's 3:01. Anybody else?
Yeah. Just one quick, it's really more comment than question. We have never been to Tunisia. It is on our bucket list, but we were in Morocco, and when we were in Morocco, we were told by our guide that that when Rommel came to Morocco, the king put on an armband with a yellow star and said, "We are all Jews here."
Morocco was very friendly to the Jews because they used to do a lot of commerce for them from Venice to whatever. And it was always was understood to be very, even though it was very French influenced, and French were not always.
Yeah.
It was interesting, more interesting for me because I read Atkinson's trilogy starting in North Africa and Tunisia and moving up through Italy until finally getting into Germany. And so as you were talking, I could see where they were going, and it made a lot more sense to me to be able to understand what you were talking about. I think you were fabulous. Erica, did you have a comment before I wrap this up?
I want to thank Nima for sharing. I learned so much more that I didn't know about that. It's amazing story, fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's so much we can learn, Nima.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So on January 31st at 10 o'clock, bring your coffee if that's what you need in the morning instead of
Yeah.
tea, and a snack in the afternoon.
Yeah. The next talk will talk more about the Holocaust. And just so you know, like anyone who does research, I mean, I read books and articles and material. I dug into World War II. I dug into Holocaust studies. I looked at the Holocaust in Europe. I looked at Babi Yar. I looked at so many things. None of it is going to be, most of it is not going to be in my presentation. It's not possible. Even my paper doesn't have, has only a small percent of everything that can possibly be told, because the paper had to have a limit of 100 pages. I stopped at 70. I'm not such a great writer, so I stopped at 70. And even within the detail, once in a while I threw some details that's not in the slide, just to let you know that there is, there's layer and layer. I didn't really get into the Holocaust today. I will talk about it, but really, just so that you know, this is not about dead bodies. Really, it's about politics of Holocaust, because there aren't a lot of dead bodies when it comes to Tunisia. So including Tunisia in the Holocaust and saying that my mother is a Holocaust survivor and that she received reparation from Germany, it's a politically loaded statement. I hope you understand. Most people think that the Holocaust happened in Europe and it happened to European Jews. So I'm going to talk about Yad Vashem. And Yad Vashem attitude toward the Jews of North Africa is very negative. They don't think that they should be included. About the Israel education system, how Israelis perceive the Holocaust. First generation, second generation, now third generation. We are now in the third generation Holocaust survivors now. So we look at things very differently. So there's a lot more that can be said about it. And stay tuned. And really, next time I think I'm going to probably speak a little bit less, and maybe we'll do a little bit more interactive.
Great.
Especially because we talk about Holocaust, and I think many people here are probably more familiar with the Holocaust than they are with North Africa. And so maybe we can open it up a little bit, some presentation, but also more open to discussion about our perception of the Holocaust.
That would be great. And we have that now to look forward to. I wanted to make sure to welcome Beverly Peck also as a new Zoom groupie. Thank you for coming. We're glad to see you. And with that, I'm going to close. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Nima. I think everybody is showing you a great round of applause and a lot of smiles. And we'll see you on the 31st, although some of us will see you before on Shabbat services. So stay well, stay warm. It's beautiful outside, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank
happy I
you.
came.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice.
Fabulous afternoon. Thank you.
Yes.
Nice.
Stop recording.